Hello, everyone. It's Brian Parham with the Rock Dojo. Get a black belt in rock guitar. And I'm sitting here with John Van Beek from Music We Remember. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we dive into the interview, John's going to play us a little something.
Great to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me on. And I'm going to play you a song. This is even old for the music I play. I found out this came out in 1902. And a lot of terms of endearment come and go. And I think this one has gone a long time ago. And I don't know when the last time you heard someone called a Tootsie Wootsie in popular music, but you'll hear that in this song today. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling down the shady lane with my baby mine. I hold her hand and she holds mine, and that's a very good sign that she's my Tootsie Wootsie in the good old summertime. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling down the shady lane with my baby mine. I hold her hand and she holds mine, and that's a very good sign that she's my Tootsie Wootsie in the good old summertime.
Wow, that was incredible. Bravo, man. That was incredible.
So I was just going to mention that song was something of a hit for Les Paul and Mary Ford in the mid 50s. They came out with that song, recording of it, and it charted at, I think, number 16. So it's interesting because I think even at the time that was an old song, and I go and play it for folks today, and it's like everybody seems to sing along of in the retirement homes. And so it's interesting how a song from like the beginning of the last century was something of a hit even in the 50s, and then everybody had heard it today, probably their parents listening to it around the house. So music is very impactful, I think, especially on impressionable young people.
It's amazing that you mentioned Les Paul, because as soon as you started soloing, I'm sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, John sounds like Les.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the slapback echo there.
It's just incredible playing, though.
I do
Incredible playing.
try and emulate Les, and of course Les really tried to emulate another guitar hero of mine, Django Reinhardt,
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
which is really interesting. And the two of them actually met one time when Django came to the States on a tour, which Les Paul was kind of blown away. Another really interesting connection. Are you familiar with Chet Atkins?
Yes.
So he was a great guitar player, but I found out his older brother, Jimmy Atkins, was actually the rhythm guitar player and singer in the Les Paul Trio.
Wow.
And the Les Paul Trio was kind of Les Paul's attempt to recreate the Hot Club of France sound, sort of with a little string band playing swing music. So it's pretty interesting to go back and find there's some old recordings of the trio, and this is pre Les Paul and Mary Ford, obviously. And Les's playing was just incredible, and I know he was in a car accident and didn't play for like 2 years, and I think after that he probably didn't have some of the dexterity, obviously, but you listen to his early playing, and even without all the trickery with like tape machines sped up and the effects, it's like he was just amazing.
Monster. He was, yeah, absolutely amazing. So I'm familiar with you from your work with Music We Remember. So can you tell us about Music We Remember?
So Music We Remember is my excuse to play the music I love for appreciative audiences. I actually worked for 20 years in a retirement community, and on the side I would play music for all the birthday parties and the special events, and of course in our memory care wing at the building there. And it was great to see how songs could bring back memories, especially to folks who couldn't remember a lot otherwise. Um, One experience, so my father's a pastor, and he would do chapel services at the retirement home that I worked at. So I was there on my days off playing the music for the services, but I'd get to see both sides of it, and we'd go in the memory care, and there would be a lady in there who, I hadn't seen her speak all week long. She was just quiet, just didn't have any sort of vocabulary, it seemed like. And we would go in there and play all these old hymns, and she'd be singing along every word to all the songs. And so music, it just somehow sediments those things in our brains. It's like they're cemented in there, and we access them differently than we do other memories or abilities, apparently. And there's a lot of studies done on the topic, but it was just amazing to me to see this woman who, she just never uttered a word, is suddenly singing along all the words to these songs, and not even looking at the songbook, because we'd take in lyric sheets for people to sing along with, and it was just all there. Another case in point, and it relates to this upright bass that you see back here. We had a musician move in to the community from San Francisco who had been a bass player in the trad jazz scene down there, and he'd suffered a brain injury actually on a gig. Somebody turned off the house lights as they were going back on stage after a break, and he tripped over the top step and hit his head on the piano and just suffered this major memory loss. And his daughter moved him up into town to be closer to her, and I found out, we have a musician moving in, and I realized I play kind of the Django style, and he played the trad jazz style, and there's a lot of overlap as far as the repertoire. Like, we would play the same music. It may be a slightly different feel, but everyone was pulling from the same popular songs of the day. And so it's like, I could go in and play with him. So I went to meet him when he, a few days after he moved in and kind of got settled in. And, I said, I play guitar, and I think we probably enjoy the same music. And I talked him into trying to play with me on the bass. And it was apparent that he couldn't really remember or grasp a lot. And so he got up with the bass, and we're sitting there trying to fumble through a couple tunes. And I realized he was standing on the wrong side of the bass. And usually, bass player will play like this, and he was trying to play over here like this. And so I was pretty sure that, basses and cellos and violas and violins, there's no left-handed versions of those. If you're left-handed, you just learn to play right-handed, because that's the way it's done. So I painstakingly convinced him to move on the other side of the bass. He was getting frustrated and wanting me to leave, and so I told him, hey, if you'll try it from the other side, I'll get out of your hair, and we'll call it quits. So I just barely convinced him to try standing on the other side of the bass, which he was sure was not going to work, and this is ridiculous and everything. But he got over there, and suddenly his fingers are like moving up and down the fretboard or fingerboard. There's no frets on the upright bass. And he's just playing along to like every tune that I throw at him, and he can't remember the names of the songs, but his fingers know exactly where to go. And that to me was amazing too, because it's like all that ability it's still there. And there was just this I guess a speed bump in the way, because he couldn't remember exactly what side of the bass to stand on. But once he was in that familiar position, it's like the gates were opened up, and he's just playing along. And so we played together for several years while he lived there, every day on my my lunch break or whatever. And then when he passed, I reached out to his daughter to see if they were good, if they were going to get rid of the bass. I wanted to buy it, because it's the memories connected to it, and I wanted to have an upright bass. And so she spoke with her sister and got back to me a few days later, and they gave it to me. So that means a lot, and I like to have it here in my studio as a reminder of just the power of music, and that friendship that I had with Pete.
That's an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that, John. How did you get started with music?
So like I mentioned, playing for chapel services, I actually my sister and I took mandatory piano lessons when we were kids, and I had this idea that it would be cool. I think I was inspired by Schroeder from the Peanuts comic strip, who was always playing his little piano and like playing Beethoven and Chopin. And so I listened to like classical music and thought it would be great to be a composer who wasn't dead. And so I had this idea that maybe my piano playing, it's like, I didn't know of any other composers that were living. Of course, now, there's composers in film and everything. But at the time in my world, I was only aware that, composers were all dead. And I thought maybe I could have a shot at becoming one if I learned to play the piano well. But that, I realized later that the guitar is way more portable than the piano, and it actually shows up in all sorts of popular music and can make an incredible array of sounds. I mean, for instance, we've got, your kind of standard guitar, and then you can add delay or reverb there, and then the delay we heard. All kinds of stuff. And then another of my favorites is the tremolo. And of course you get distortions and all kinds of things. And so it's, as I became an older teenager, I was gravitating toward guitar, and I didn't actually start playing till I was 18, I believe. And at the time, my grandmother was playing piano for these chapel services at the retirement home. And we all lived in the same house. And so she had got me my first guitar. And so I would try and keep up with her. But being a piano player, she gravitated toward all of the non-guitar friendly keys. And so we'd start a song and she would say, "This is in 4 flats." And, that's A flat. And it's like, I didn't know bar chords. And so I had this one scale that I knew I could get away with. So if it was in 4 flats, I could put my finger there, and I had this scale pattern. So I would basically be running scales and practicing my scales during the song. And then finally, I figured out some chords, but it was like she would play in, I think she would sometimes play in the key of G. That was like 1 sharp, and anything more was just like, we would do 5 flats, which is D flat, and very difficult for a beginning guitar player. So I was kind of struggling to keep up, but I knew I had this one major scale pattern, and I just move it to the right key and I could play along.
John, this is hilarious on so many levels. First of all, it's just a hilarious story. But the other thing is, like, you're the first guitar player I ever met that didn't go for the minor pentatonic scale in pattern 1. That would have probably got you kicked out of that band.
Maybe. Right, yeah.
You went for a major scale.
Yeah, and I actually, I guess I did know the pentatonic scale, but I knew it, let's say we're in A flat. Let me do this. Get a little backing track there, but that's the major scale. I knew, of course, I knew the pentatonic minor scale, but I didn't at that time. I wasn't sure how it related to the major scale, so it would have sounded like. Which really wasn't in keeping with what we were doing.
Exactly.
Of course, I later found out that you can take that minor pentatonic scale and scoot it down, and you've got the major, and so it could have been.
Wow. Well, it sounds like when you phrase it so well, they all sound great.
Well, thank you. I've been playing for over 20 years now, so that was like half my life ago. But yeah, it was just interesting because it's like I can't play bar chords yet because I don't know, and I guess I could do power chords, but it just didn't. I don't know. It didn't seem like I was doing very much, so I was running scales most of the time. Just
That's hilarious. So okay, so we know you play piano. Obviously you play guitar. You play a little. It sounds like you play a little bit of bass as well.
Yeah, I play some bass, and actually recently I've got a 6-string Ibanez bass, and I actually play I play bass like every week on electric bass for a church service on Sunday mornings. So I play electric bass. I play some upright. You know, Portland's full of bass players, so if I need one, I can I can get one. Um, but yeah, guitar is the main thing. I think there's a mandolin up there. I've got a cello next to my bed in the bedroom that I haven't touched in years, but I really wish I had the time for.
Oh,
um,
wow.
but yeah, anything with strings, I sort of will try and figure it out if I can.
Wow. So how, okay, so this is going to be a strange question because we know obviously that music has had an enormous impact on your life. But outside of being a musician, what has music taught you outside of actually physically playing?
Yeah,
Or how has it helped to develop your personality? Or do you know what I mean? What I'm trying to say?
yeah. Well, I know for one thing for sure, it's like I'm typically a somewhat, I guess in my younger years, and maybe it's because I'm older, but I definitely would have considered myself as kind of a shy person. But and even today, I have a little reservation about just kind of striking up a conversation with somebody. But I have noticed if I have my guitar on, I have confidence. So I'm able to conduct interviews on Zoom like this, which maybe that's why I'm wearing the guitar. I don't know. But I think, yeah, there's something about having a guitar in your hands. It's like you don't have to, what do I do with these? You kind of don't have to awkwardly fidget. It's like, well, I can be running scales while I'm chatting with you or something. Um, but I think having some music ability, if not everybody's into sports or something, and I think music is definitely one thing, especially for kids. If they're encouraged, it can really give them a sense of value. And of course, we should be valued just for being, of course. But I think having a skill, or just looking cool with a guitar can go a long way toward some self-esteem maybe.
Yeah,
But it's
fantastic.
great. And of course, I've got 3 kids around the house, and I think I've kind of, my perspective over time has shifted a little on the way I look at learning music, and I have taught a little bit. And I'm not super familiar with how things are done at Rock Dojo. But are you familiar with Victor Wooten, the bass player?
Yes, actually, I'm really excited because I did an interview for a student from Berkeley interviewed me for a class at Berkeley, which was I think it's like the role of the artist in modern society.
Okay.
And I looked at and I was like, wow, I really want to take this class. I looked at the syllabus before the interview, and I'm like, man, this class sounds amazing, but like Berkeley classes are really expensive. I can't just like be like, oh, I want
Right.
to study this because I want to study everything.
It's a
But
business expense.
yes, exactly. I remember, but I read the books. I was like, you know what? I can't afford to take the class just for the heck of it.
Right.
But I can read the books listed in the syllabus. So I ordered all the books from the syllabus, and Victor Wooten was the first prescribed book. And
Okay.
so I'm really excited to read his book. It's on my reading list. It's going to be the next one
So,
I get.
so this is one thing that he touches on, and two. So when I learned guitar, and this goes to show kind of how my mindset has probably changed over time. And to mention one thing, my grandmother, I think she only ever took one piano lesson,
Wow.
and she kind of was played by ear. She'd also played accordion when she was younger. She was a very short, petite lady, so like an accordion, I think probably wasn't great for her frame, because they're heavy. Um,
Mhm.
but she played accordion for many years when she was a young woman, and then of course piano is very similar. Um, but when I I guess maybe coming from sort of that classical music mindset where it's kind of like, and my idea of composers was they would just get an idea and scribble it out on sheet music, and it was just inspiration and everything. um, and of course that was based on years of hard work and practice and everything, which everything is. um, but when I learned guitar, I learned from, it wasn't the Mel Bay books. It was like the Alfred's guitar method, which was very similar, probably a competitor to Mel Bay. Um, but it was like, you go through the book and you kind of read, and I don't think there was any tab in the book that I learned from. And so I wasn't sure if tab was like, if I should be suspicious of it because it's not actual music notation. And I had this mindset that it's like, well, you had to do everything perfectly, like it's on the page, and stuff like that. And write things out. And then I found, as I became more aware, it's like most of the folks that we actually listen to making popular music, they kind of just figured it out on their own, and it kind of became a distinctive thing for them because of how they learned it. And so going back to Victor Wooten, his big thing is that music is a language. And when we're children, we don't usually start learning a language by learning to recite the alphabet, which he compares to scales. And we also, we try to communicate with our parents who are professionals at speaking English, if English is your first language. So he talks about, and I've really kind of grabbed onto what he says. It's like when we learn English as our first language, or whatever our first language is, we're interacting with professionals. And in the music world, well, you're put in a beginner class and you interact with beginners, and you don't have these conversations with pros like you do in actual language. But if music is a language, we should look at it that way. And, it's like now, my 4-year-old, I just kind of leave a guitar out and she will sit down and play it, and she's not holding it correctly and she's just kind of having fun with it. But I think that's an important thing, is to, just kind of put the cookies on the bottom shelf where
I like that.
Put the reach cookies. Them, and then because obviously, like, when you're a baby, you're hearing, and that's another important thing. I think you've mentioned this in some of your social media posts, is like play a lot of music around the house, and it's like, well, kids I think typically hear their parents or family members talking ever since they're born, or even before they're born, and then it takes them 2 or 3 years before they can actually frame a full sentence. And I think, and Victor talks about approaching music that way. It's just kind of like, well, kind of work around with it, and then it's not until later grades in school that we actually learn language theory or English. And so maybe figure out how it works, just like play the guitar, play music, play around on the piano, and just have fun with it. And then as time goes by and you get that feedback from professionals or people more experienced than you, like with English as a first language, you start to, okay, maybe I'm doing this a little bit incorrectly. And I found that folks that I've played music with who learned that way, they, it's not, they didn't have the book, they just kind of figured it out. Their ear is like, you can play something and it's like they can play it right back to you.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it's like, this conversation, before we came on today, it's like neither of us were like consulting a dictionary to figure out what words to use. We're proficient in English. And I think if we follow that same approach with music, and obviously that only goes for a certain extent, and of course the same with English. If you want to become an English major, there's this whole other realm of English. But if you want to have fun and play, pop guitar or rock guitar, and have fun with your friends, it's like, that's kind of I think the foundation is just have fun with it. And if you learn it in that natural progression, kind of the way you learn a language, for one thing, your ear, of course, is going to develop better. You're not going to be tied to a sheet of paper. I do occasionally play with some people where it's like, if they don't have anything in front of them, a chord chart, it's like they can't actually hear the changes.
Wow.
And then other people, and I used to be that person. It's like, well, I got to write everything down. Now it's like when I learn, so in the retirement home world, somebody will, like the good old Summertime, somebody will say, oh, can you play this song? And it's like, well, I don't know it. So I'll pull it up on Spotify or YouTube, and my, I just listen to it a few times. And then once I kind of can hum the melody, I'll go in and most of the time with simpler songs now, it's like, oh, I just know what chords they're playing. It's like I don't even have to have the guitar to work it out. Of course, you get to things like Girl from Ipanema, and that's a whole more a whole bigger challenge. And I think that comes down to, you talk about vocabulary in English. Like if we sat down here, let's say I was a nurse practitioner or something, and we tried to have a conversation, and I was using a whole bunch of, if I was referencing a whole bunch of drugs and abbreviations, you know what a UTI is. I think everybody might know what a urinary tract infection is, but you get into the medical world, and it's like this whole other vocabulary that I speak English, but I have no clue what that is. And I think the same thing happens in music. It's like, okay, I'm pretty good at this sort of music. And then once you kind of, let's say you branch off into like the bossa nova, it's like, at first it's like, whoa, why on earth are they doing a chord progression that goes, like this? It doesn't make sense. And of course that's a jazz cliche as well. But once you've heard it, and if you've kind of learned music the way you learn a language, once you hear it and figure out how it's done, it's like learning a new word. Like the first time you say jewelry, like one of my daughters would always say jewelry, and it it maybe took a year. Once I was like, I wish she'd say that correctly. It took maybe a year or two of just kind of like
working it out.
It's like, and now, it's like, oh, jewelry, but there's little things like that. It's like, it takes a while, but once you get them, then you can say it fine. And so the same thing with music vocabulary or a new genre. It's like, okay, there's all these like idioms and stereotypical phrases that to a newcomer, it's like, what on earth is going on here? And then once you figure it out, it's like, oh, okay. And then you start recognizing that pattern in other pieces of music within that genre. And then you can hear it, and then you can just play it, without even figuring it out. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, they're, that's that same, it's like a cliche, which makes the style what the style is. And just, so I think this goes back to your question of what has music taught me. I think I'm getting better at this. You'd have to ask my wife, but I think it's made me a better listener. You hear those changes, and then if you're jamming with other people, you can tell at a jam session who's listening to everybody else in the circle and who's just waiting for their turn to solo and only listening to themselves. Because there will be some sort of musical continuity. Like the guy who just soloed before me, it's like, I'm gonna quote a little bit of what he did and then take it in a different direction. And then there's the other guy kind of in the corner who, like, everyone else is soloing, and he's trying to figure out the next lick that he's going to play, and he's not even tuned into like where it's going. So I think that's a big thing, is like, if anything else, music can develop your listening skills, even on a, personal level. Just, you don't talk all the time. The space is important, as much as the notes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. That was fascinating to listen to hear your philosophy. Also to hear another, by the way, there's something to this. You're like the third guest, all amazing, who have made it through either the Mel Bay or the Alfred. So at the same time, I'm like, those books get trashed in popular guitar culture. Okay. I had Angus Clark was on here with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. He went through all the books, right? That was how he learned. And then there was another guy, Matt Bennick, went through all the books, right? Okay. And it sounds like, did you go through all the Alfred books?
I don't know how many there are. I think I made it to like book number 6 or 7.
That sounds like, because I've done some research on those. I think I have them. It actually might be all of them, 6 or 7.
And they may be on my shelf here somewhere. But again, and that's the thing. I feel like, that's kind of where I started. But if I had it to do all over again, I don't know if that's how I would do it.
And and that's what I'm saying. That's what's fascinating, though, because it's not that you were saying you were making a whole other point. And it's I think it's just fascinating how many different ways that you can approach music. And the way that I approach music with my students is the second approach that you were talking about. So my thing is like I'm a huge believer in the 80-20 philosophy. There's just a
Yeah.
few things that you need to know in any particular field just to get into the game. And my job is to get them into the game as soon as possible. So when it comes to like
Yeah.
rock guitar, it's like, dude, get your minor pentatonic scale together, get your power chords together, get your open power chords together, get a couple open chords together, and a few basic, and you can make music for the rest of your life. And then I love everything that you were talking about, like playing with other people, which is a totally different thing. You
Sure.
know, and anyways, I don't want to get into my end. I can go in a totally
No,
different
that's
direction,
great.
but this is all about you. And so we're just go right back to you. What does live music have to offer as opposed to recorded music? Because one thing that you didn't mention is really your work with Music We Remember and the live performance aspect. Can you talk a little bit about that? And can you talk also about what live music has to offer seniors?
Sure, yeah, and I think I think I meant to go there, and of course I went down a rabbit trail with my work, but so I before the pandemic, I was out playing for the circuit, as some of us call it, the retirement homes and care home situations, and a lot of them they'll have some old familiar music like on the TV, like on the Comcast Oldies channel or whatever. There's something different, and especially, of course, nowadays with social media, YouTube, and everything, it's interesting to see like how this generation, when they're elders, when they become old themselves, how they interact with music throughout their lives. But we have to remember that back in the 40s and the 50s, music. So the jukebox and the radio, those were still they're not totally new, but they were obviously more predominant than television. Television didn't come out until sometime later. But like the main way that you would enjoy music was like in a live setting, and of course there was like a social aspect, and of course you get a lot of great musicians today, especially like in the R&B world, and of course their musical grounding is in the church, and it's like there's that huge social interaction that goes on there, and maybe that's one thing where that's kind of stayed constant through time. But in the 40s and 50s, of course, you'd go to you'd have the sock hops and the dances and everything, and it was just this huge social aspect, which now, of course, and during COVID, everyone's a little more isolated and doing things on the screen. But for my audiences, a lot of the music that they enjoyed, it's like maybe they met their spouse at a dance, and a lot of folks from that time, you don't hear it as much now, but it's like, oh, they're playing our song. It's like they had a song that was kind of like their song, and maybe it's the first song they heard that they danced together to, and so it has that connection. And of course, when you're a teenager and you're developing everything, I guess all those experiences, and especially music, and that's one thing the research shows, it's like at that certain developmental age, the inputs, the music and everything, it's like it stays in your mind longer than you may have like short-term memory loss, where you can't remember the events of the past week or the month or the year or something. But like a lot of the folks I play for, it's like they'll sometimes say, oh, my mother's coming to visit, or they'll obviously someone who's no longer here, they have this concept from years ago that they're still kind of, that world is still more alive to them than the world of today, and so bringing the music into them from that era, and music they grew up with, or in some cases they heard their parents play around the house, or they may have sung along to it, it really brings back, and I would say not just the memories of those days, and hopefully good memories, but also the feeling, whatever feelings associated with that they have. I know one gentleman, and my audiences are getting younger, now they want to, their music is like Elvis and the Beatles and later. And so I'll play some of the songs that I really like, the 20s, 30s, 40s, that's kind of my deal. And I'll play some of it, and it's like they still still enjoy it. And it's, one gentleman was telling me, it's like, my dad and we used to sing these songs together at the piano. And so maybe it's music from before, before they sort of developed their own taste, but it's still a connection to their youth. And so, I'm doing my best to learn some rock and roll and country music that folks want to hear. But what I really love is the old stuff. And so I'll try and intersperse. My show will be like, I'll run the gamut from like, I just played you a song at the beginning here from 1902, which I thought that song was maybe older than the 50s when Les Paul and Mary Ford recorded it, but I didn't know it was quite that old.
Wow.
And it's like, that's there's tunes like that, and there's some little silly tunes that were probably real popular with kids in the 40s, or their parents played it to them in the 50s. And it's like, I'll pull one of those out, and it's like, this is like the one song that the whole room is singing along to. And that's the other thing with live music. With recorded music, obviously Spotify can suggest things to you that you might like. But being able to watch people listen and how they respond to a certain song, and then it's like, oh, well, that one lady, she only sang along when I played a Beach Boys song. Maybe I'll do another one. There's kind of that going on, and just the human interaction, again, that social engagement that they would have enjoyed back when they were listening to that music is missing in other forms of media, I would say. Obviously they could, anybody could pull up Frank Sinatra or Elvis on YouTube and enjoy it, as much as you can enjoy a recording. But it was funny. I played an Elvis tune somewhere the other day, and the lady was like, "Elvis would be jealous of you," or something. Okay.
Wow.
And there was one gal, and two, maybe we can blame this on not remembering things quite the way they used to. But there was one gal. It's like, I just love guitar music, and I've listened to all the guitar players, and you're the best. And it's like, well, okay, so it's great for my ego,
That's amazing. Wow.
So I think it goes both ways, but just having that interaction where you're in the same room with somebody, and to a certain extent, Zoom is, we can try, I've tried Zoom performances, and I'll have to say that they're definitely not the same. But there's still, you can still interact with people over it. But it's a hurdle. and kind of the same for having to perform with a mask on, where people can't see me smile. It's like the last line in Girl from Ipanema, when she passes, he smiles, but she doesn't see. We all have face masks on, and nobody can see you smile. So you've got to get really expressive eyebrows or something.
Where can people go to learn more about your work?
Sure. If you go to musicweremember.com, that's my website, and I've got some links there to some videos. Of course, if you look me up on Google Maps, I've got a listing on there, and you can read what other people say about me. If I'm having a bad day, I just go on there and read my 5-star listings and feel a little better.
Are there any questions I did not ask you that I should have?
Even if you didn't, I probably answered some of them. Just this swerving all over the road here with my responses. But yeah, I mean, music is great, and it's great. See, you kind of work with the other end of the age spectrum, and just parents playing music around the house of just all sorts. It's like, when I was learning, there was one goofy song called Mersey Dotes, which was like a hit in the 40s, and it's just a nonsense song basically. But it's like, when I was learning it, it's like I came home one day and like all my kids were singing it because they heard me, learning the song. It's just funny. So yeah, pick a wide array of music to play around the house, and expose kids to the good stuff, and it'll definitely create memories. Talk about why you like certain music or what it means to you. It's a good conversation starter too.
Amazing. John, Music We Remember, thank you so much. Stick around. I'm going to say bye to the audience that'll be watching this, but I want you to stick around for 1 second. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for watching. Yeah.